Hi, my name is Jay Franey, and I'll be talking to you today about a recent Supreme Court decision, Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission. As you can see, I'm standing in front of the Supreme Court right now. Not really. It's just a picture. But I figured it would spruce up my little video presentation here. The citation number for this court case, 210 US.Lexis 766. I used LexisNexis court notes for this project. Here are the facts of the case. A conservative nonprofit called Citizens United created a negative documentary during the 2008 primary cycle about Hillary Clinton. The idea behind it was it looked like a movie, but it was really a piece of campaign propaganda. Citizens United knew that the documentary violated rules of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, which is also known as the McCain-Feingold Act. They knew it violated the act on three fronts. McCain-Feingold, first of all, prevents corporations and labor unions from funding quote-unquote electioneering communications, end quote, from their general treasury. What they have to do is they have to set up a political action committee, and through that vehicle they're allowed to pay for advertising and things like that. But PACs are, and here's a very important point, are strictly regulated by the Federal Elections Commission. The second thing that the Hillary documentary that they had a problem with, that Citizens United had a problem with the McCain-Feingold Act, was the McCain-Feingold Act requires you to disclose all your donations. And thirdly, it requires you to give a disclaimer when it is not authorized by the candidate. So they would have had to say at the beginning, this is not authorized by Hillary Clinton. And then finally, this is a fourth item, there's a time limit. There's a blackout period with which PACs, political action committees, can run these documentaries. One is 30 days. There's a blackout period from 30 days before primary and 60 days before the general. Citizens United wanted to release this on demand, but realized it was in violation of the McCain-Feingold Act, so they sought an injunction in the U.S. District Court, claiming that the ban on corporate expenditures and the disclosure-disclaimer provision of the McCain-Feingold Act violated their First Amendment protections of free speech. Now, the U.S. District Court denied the injunction. It then moved to the Supreme Court. What are the issues here? There's two of them. The first is funding. The ability for corporations or labor unions to directly fund political advertising. Secondly, there's the disclosure provision. Do they have to tell where the money came from? Do they have to disclose that it wasn't authorized by a certain candidate? Basically, the Supreme Court trying to answer two questions. Does the ban on direct corporate expenditures violate First Amendment rights to free speech? And two, are the disclosure and disclaimer provisions also a violation of First Amendment rights? And a very narrow decision done along ideological lines, conservative, liberal. The court ruled to reverse the district court's injunction by a 5-4 vote. The court ruled that the provisions of the McCain-Feingold Act's ban on direct corporate expenditures violated the First Amendment and was thus unconstitutional. They did uphold the disclosure and disclaimer ban. The opinion was delivered by Justice Anthony M. Kennedy. It was joined by Chief Justice Roberts, Justices Scalia, Thomas, and Alito, the conservative faction. Here was Justice Kennedy's reasoning. Essentially, money in the form of advertising is a component of free speech, is a component of speech. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Kennedy argued that the First Amendment prevents a distinction on what is spoken, but also who speaks. He argued that playing favorites creates censorship. Thus, corporations are protected by the First Amendment as well. Government does not place restrictions on speech. Government does place restrictions on speech. Think of the government prohibiting a newspaper from publishing classified information. That would be within the realm of the government's right. That would be constitutional. But elections, Kennedy argued elections aren't one of those areas where the government can limit free speech. Therefore, as I said, limits on corporate expenditures for political advertising were ruled unconstitutional. Now, there was obviously heavy dissent by the liberal wing. The main dissent was authored by Justice Stevens. It was signed by joined by Ginsburg, Justices Ginsburg, Breyer, and Sotomayor. Stevens' main arguing was that corporations and people are not the same thing, and therefore corporations are not afforded the same protections under the First Amendment. Specifically with regard to elections, corporations can't vote. Non-citizens can sit on the board of corporations. Stevens really argued that the first 9 amendments of the Constitution were individual protections designed to protect the individual from government abuses. The framers had no intent to include corporations in that. He also argued that there was already a mechanism through which corporations could fund campaign advertising. That was through the political action committees. It was within the rights of government to place restrictions on speech because of the potential for money to corrupt democracy. Stevens argued that the McCain-Feingold Act limiting corporate donations was within the government's rights to curb freedom in order to protect the integrity of our democracy. What do we have going forward? We're going to have an unlimited spending by corporations on federal campaigns. Now, I should make this point clear. It's issue campaigns. Corporations still can't give unlimited amounts directly to, say, Romney's campaign or Obama's campaign. They have to set up an issue campaign like Citizens United saying Romney's great or Obama stinks. Whatever. It ended 63 years of prohibition on corporate involvement in campaigns, which is pretty amazing. It ended the blackout periods. We have these things called super PACs now that can raise all this money. The interesting thing, though, is they still have to disclose where they're getting their money from. The troubling aspect is the rise of these nonprofits. Now, the nonprofits do not fall under Federal Elections Commission's rules. They come under IRS rules, which are not very well enforced. The thing is the IRS rules on nonprofits are pretty gray, so these nonprofits can be created and they won't actually go help people like feed the homeless. They're essentially campaign mechanisms. And because they're listed as nonprofits and not political action committee, they don't have to disclose where they get their money from, which is kind of scary. What we're going to see is a very expensive campaign season with very confusing messages. Voters are going to get bombarded. And I think it really does jeopardize our democracy. The sources I used were oyez.org from the IIT Chicago-Kent College of Law, as I said, LexisNexis, and the Washington Post. Thank you very much.